Welcome to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and our webinar and roundtable on the hospitality and alcohol industry survival and competitiveness through COVID-19. I'm Larissa Harrapin. I'm with the National Post and the Financial Post. Thank you to all of you for joining us this morning. I'd like to say hello to our guests. They have been patiently waiting. Of course, all of our viewers have as well. Larry Isaacs is the president of the Firkin group of pubs. Hi, Larry.
Good morning.
Peter Watts is the managing director with the Canadian Malting Barley Technical Center. Hi, Peter. Thank you kindly for joining us. Michael Brennan is the chief executive officer at the Great Western Brewing Company. Michael, hello.
Good morning.
And Mark Valencia is the General Counsel for Corporate Secretary and Vice President of Public Affairs at Corby Spirit and Wine Limited. Hi, Mark.
Good morning, Larissa.
Thank you to all of you kindly for joining us this morning for this very important discussion. It's November 30th, a day, of course, that I think a lot of Canadians are expecting to hear more from the Liberal government. Reports have suggested that the government, when they release their fiscal update later today, will focus on some of the hardest hit sectors. And there is speculation that hospitality will be one of them. Without a shadow of a doubt, our guests are hoping to hear and see something from the government. We'll get more on their take a little later on. We would like to get some housekeeping rules out of the way. There will be time for questions at the end, so please do feel free to use a Slido. The link to that Slido page was included in the event email that you received just prior to your webinar. We'll try to get to those as many as we can. And of course, some big thank yous on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce. Please bear with us as we get through all of these names, which are very important. These are the sponsors of the Freeze the Alcohol Tax campaign. A big thank you to Arterra Wines Canada, the Barley Council of Canada, Beer Canada, Big Rig Kitchen and Brewery, Boston Pizza, CWB Franchise Finance, the Firkin Group of Pubs, La Belle et la Boeuf Burger Bar, Lone Star Texas Grill, Grain Growers of Canada, the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, Northland Restaurant Group, Canada's National Brewers, the Ontario Restaurant, Hotel and Motel Association, Restaurants Canada, Service Inspired Restaurants, Spirits Canada, St. Louis Bar and Grill, Wine Growers Canada. A big thank you. This list of names, this is the hospitality sector that makes Canada tick-tock. Without a doubt, COVID-19 has impacted so many sectors right across the board. Right across the board here in Canada. Larry, if we can get your take, how has that affected the Firkin group of pubs?
If I can put it into one word to start, I would say devastating. We own and operate 23 locations in Ontario, Canada, as well as operations in a mall. We also operate in Halifax Airport, as well as across the border in the US, in Dallas, Washington, San Antonio, and Baltimore, Maryland. We employ over 650 people. Right now, we only have 25 people employed in the company. We don't have any light at the end of the tunnel as to when we are going to be able to reopen all of our locations. And even though all those powers that we have told us we're going to have patios into the winter, which is absolutely nonsense. That's not possible. That we are not an essential service is not possible. For whatever reason, our industry has been scapegoated as the problem to COVID-19, which is absolutely untrue. And as you've seen over the recent weeks, the big box stores and online, all of them up 200, 300, 1,000% in sales. And yet we are laying off staff. And I speak just generally of our small company right now, but I speak on behalf of our entire industry of 1.2 million employees. We contribute over 4% to the GDP, as well as paying out 31 billion in salaries and over 20 billion in taxes to the governments across the country. So as you can imagine, we are sitting with our hands tied behind our back and have no ability to improve our situation until new decisions are made.
Peter, Larry just said it has been devastating. Tell us the effect for the Canadian Malting Barley Technical Center.
Well, from the agricultural side and the producer's side, or the value chain for barley, the story has been a little bit different. We've certainly seen an impact on sales of malt, given the drop in beer production, particularly in Canada and the US. So that's had an impact on our, certainly on the Canadian malting industry. So they've struggled over the past 7 or 8 months. With respect to the barley growers and the export industry, the story is a little bit different. We had a good crop this summer, and we've had fairly good export demand, as we've seen recoveries in the economies in some of our export markets like Asia in particular. So it's a bit of a dichotomy, but certainly there's been a dramatic drop, of course, in beer consumption in North America, and that's still back to the Canadian malting industry, and ultimately back to the entire value chain. So it's definitely had a negative impact. We are starting to see signs of a recovery, but we still have a long ways to go.
Mark, how has the Great Western Brewing Company been navigating this time?
For us, I mean, we are a regional brewery here in Western Canada. Our brewery is an old one, and we have a balance, fortunately, between retail and customers like Larry throughout Western Canada. Those customers, clearly, we feel that pain from our business perspective. People are still interested in drinking beer, probably not quite as much as Peter points out. But so we are a little bit more balanced than the bar and restaurant industry. However, they are our nearest and dearest friends, so their pain flows through to us as well. But we'll continue to manage through this, hopefully, and get to the other side.
Mark, how have you been navigating?
I think, like Michael, it's mixed impact for us as well. For Corby, I mean, we're the largest publicly traded spirits company in Canada. We're the second largest player in the spirits market itself. We have brands across the portfolio. So we have JP Wiser's, Lot 40, Pike Creek Canadian Whiskeys, Lamb's Rum, Polarized Vodka. Emerging brands like Angava Gin and Cabot Trail Maple Cream Liqueur. We're also part of Pernod Ricard, the global #2, and they have brands like Absolute Vodka, Glenlivet Scotch Whiskey, Jameson Irish Whiskey. So we have a brand in our portfolio for every occasion, and they're sold all across Canada and select markets internationally as well. And we work through the liquor boards across Canada and differently in different provinces. But as mentioned, I mean, the pandemic did create a lot of economic uncertainty back in March. Certainly, we had rapidly changing regulations, restrictions, new ways of working and living for everybody. And as we've seen, one of the hardest hit industries was hospitality, as the restaurants and bars, or the on-premise channel, as we call it, all had to close overnight. The on-premise is an important way that we engage with our consumers, and we build our brands. And with that closure, all of our scheduled events all had to close. And certain our brands that have a stronger presence in this channel were quite negatively affected. I mean, if we go back, for North America at least, the closure was 2 weeks in advance of St. Patrick's Day. But like many others, Corby and Harm Walker, we're in a fortunate position to keep operating. Having been deemed essential, and we quickly pivoted our businesses and donated significant amounts of hand sanitizer, created large amounts of ethanol to give to the large manufacturers of hand sanitizer to help and answer the government's call there. But our employees and our company were very passionate about supporting our partners in the on-premise. We had created a special task force to do that, and we looked at many different ways that we could do that. We donated money in various different ways. We even partnered with our biggest competitor. We put aside our differences and partnered with them to donate to Bartender Association, as well as to the Glad Day Bookshop to help the LGBTQ tip workers. And we're launching a cocktail book shortly that'll, with input from across the country, all proceeds will go again to the bartender associations. We found ways to try to keep them engaged. As Larry mentioned, a lot of them are unfortunately not able to work. So we created online educational opportunities, offering free online courses, whether it's at the Wine and Spirits Education Trust or Trash Tiki. We did things to help there. And then through our associations and through our people, we also supported the ongoing efforts, both for regulatory change that we've seen to allow delivery cocktails and other things, and also use our social channels to encourage people to order from the on-premise. So we were very fortunate that we were deemed essential, and that allowed us to try to help others.
And of course, very, very commendable that a lot of Canadian manufacturing had made that pivot to produce PPE, to step up to the plate. Big, big thank you. I want to go back to something that Larry had touched on. And please do feel free to weigh in, Michael, Peter, and Mark, of course. The government had introduced measures, and this second wave is introducing new measures, different across regions, different across the board. Lockdowns, different across provinces. Larry, what does that do to your business?
The lockdowns, firstly, when they come, don't come with enough notice. We have to bring in inventories into all the stores and restart up all the stores, and the government comes with 24 or 48 hours notice of these stores being shut down, which costs us huge amount of money to throw away inventory again. We've invested across the board, and you can see the stats from Restaurants Canada, $750 million in perspex and PPE and contactless menus in order to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And yet with all of that still being locked down. So the ability to maintain the staffing levels is also impossible. The government introduced the CERB program, and when we were allowed to get back to work, a lot of the employees didn't want to come back to work because they were better off staying at home collecting CERB than coming back to work. So we had a lot of impact on the workforce, we had a lot of impact on lost supplies, and of course on cost to our suppliers. We are part of a pyramid, which I call the precarious pyramid of success, where we impact the farmers, the manufacturers, the distributors, and all the splintered people around that. The handymen, the electricians, the plumbers, all of them are impacted by the fact that we are closed down, the florists. And our business is 65% employee women and minorities. All of these people have been impacted by this hard shutdown with no backup, with no stats, with no information as to how and where we are creating the problems and giving us no opportunity to solve those problems, to be part of the solution. It makes no sense.
Peter, did you see enough government program support throughout this time when it came to the agriculture sector?
Well, our industry is a little different, Larissa, in this case. As I mentioned before, the agriculture sector in Canada is very dependent on export markets as well as the domestic market. So while the drop in demand in the case of barley malt, for example, from the brewing industry in North America definitely had a negative impact, our export markets were quite strong. We had good rail movement due to a drop in demand for other export commodities. So from the agriculture's perspective, the industry has fared relatively well through this process. So we weren't relying on government support. And I mentioned earlier, we had a great crop this summer, particularly in Western Canada, great cereals crop. And as a result, we do have good supplies to export. So our situation is a little bit different, but as Larry mentioned, the drop in demand in North America it spills back to the manufacturing and to the producers, and it's going to take quite a while for us to get back to sort of normal in our industry.
Michael, you painted a rather optimistic picture with respect to Great Western Brewing Company. When you look back now, is there anything else that you could have done more? Were there any other challenges that you were faced with that perhaps looking back now, you know how to kind of tweak them going forward?
Yeah, well, I've jokingly said I must have skipped the university class on global pandemics because it has been a unique experience for us to try and kind of wade our way through this. We're upstream from Larry and his businesses, so we face the exact same issues that they have. Round one in March, when everything closed literally for 2 to 2.5 months here in the West, we had a significant amount of beer. We're a small brewery, but we had 125,000 liters of beer that went stale on us. And kind of similar to Mark, we seized that opportunity and worked with a local distiller to turn that into hand sanitizer instead of simply throwing it down the drain. So that was a good learning. I hope I don't have to reuse that learning in the coming kind of months here. As you pointed out earlier, there's a fair difference province by province as to how they're handling and how they're locking down. Our two major provinces, Alberta and Saskatchewan, for our business, have chosen to keep bars and restaurants open. They're definitely limiting in the capacity within them, but they are trying to keep them open. So that's another challenge for us. I'm hoping we don't have more stale beer coming up. But we've again, learning from March, really managed our inventory a little differently over the fall, assuming that there could be a lockdown like this returning.
Mark, we often talk about Canada's global competitiveness. Most recently, at the Financial Post, I spoke with the mayor of Niagara Falls and the mayor of Windsor, and the two of them had some, banter back and forth. And the mayor of Niagara Falls, Jim Diodati, jokingly said to the mayor of Windsor, Drew Dilkins, "Well, you've got the whiskey." And I'm just wondering, Mark, when it comes to the distillery, Hiram Walker in Windsor, it is, correct me if I'm wrong, if not the largest, one of the largest distilleries in North America. How does it fare on a global stage?
Yeah, thank you. It is one of the, it is the largest North American beverage alcohol distillery. I mean, it goes back, it predates Canada to the 1850s. And Canadian whiskey was once celebrated as one of the biggest spirits in the world. I think it's had its challenges as the days have gone by, but I think it's leading a resurgence at this point. I think, going back to some of the comments that were mentioned earlier by some of my colleagues here, I think it's more how we're seeing how the pandemic has hit us as well as being just a part of our business that's so important and how we interact with consumers, having to cancel events and not be able to interact in that way. That has led us to sort of curtail how we interact with consumers, obviously, in terms of advertising and even introducing innovation and new brands. These are things that are all going to have to sort of stay on hold a little bit or be done in different ways as we go forward, again, and trying to help our 200-year-old business and distillery.
Peter, it has been an unprecedented, I guess last year was so unprecedented when it came to trade volatility, or some would say the last 4 years have been unprecedented when it comes to trade volatility. Do you watch these global trading relationships? I mean, you've talked about that export is a big part of your company and exporting to China. How much do these global trade partnerships affect what you do?
Oh, well, they definitely have a big impact. Let me say for starters that our largest market for Canadian barley, processed barley malt, is the domestic brewing industry in Canada, followed by the United States. So the North American market takes about 75% of the processed malt produced in Canada. And that's a $500 million industry right there in terms of sales alone, never mind the spin-off benefits. So, we have a very obviously free trade agreement with the U.S. That's our biggest market. So there's been no impact from a trade perspective. Just the drop in demand has had a negative impact. From a global standpoint, many people will be aware that we've had some tensions with China over trade. And so that curtailed exports of canola in particular. It has not impacted the other grain sectors such as wheat and barley. And China is our largest export market by far for Canadian malting barley. They take about 80 to 85% of all the barley that's being exported out of Canada right now. So, that the global trade tensions are very risky for a country like Canada that's very export dependent. Australia is suffering through some punishing tariffs on their exports of barley, wine, due to the trade tensions with China. So, we have to be very mindful of these, and they're very disruptive potentially for Canada in terms of our exports. So to date, certainly, as I said, on barley, we're okay. We've had a very strong export program this year, but we are vulnerable with these types of, political trade interventions from national governments elsewhere.
Michael, Peter had touched on the domestic aspect, and I'm wondering when it comes to interprovincial alcohol trade, is the infrastructure there now? I mean, we saw what happened in 2019 rather, with the federal budget, and of course, the government removing those trade barriers, leaving it up to the provinces. What does that infrastructure look like now? Is it where it should be?
It isn't. It is easier for me to actually list my products in any United state than it is for me to list it in other provinces. So while some of the barriers have come down, we have continual battles to try and get a little bit more of a fair playing field across Canada. It's also, beer is a category that loves to be taxed. So I'd be remiss in not kind of mentioning, we get taxed both provincially and federally. The federal government has a tax currently that just automatically escalates every year. The taxes have gone up 4 times in the last 3 years. So it's a very difficult environment, and specifically, this could be a great opportunity for the government to show an industry that's had a lot of difficulties over the past 6 to 9 months, some relief in either removing or taking out part of those taxes.
I'm curious for Larry and for Mark to weigh in on this as well. When it comes to domestic trade policies, are they where they should be? Same question as to Michael.
Go ahead, Mark.
We operate across the country and serving consumers throughout. We're negatively impacted, as Michael's mentioned, by some of these alcohol policies that discriminate against products that are made from outside of province. 90% of our products are made in Ontario, and it just makes it more costly to do business across Canada, which means that we have fewer resources to invest and compete internationally. One example of this would be that it would be, say, in Nova Scotia, for example, where Ontario products have a 160% spirits markup, but local distillers would only pay about 50 to 60% of that markup. So again, it is more challenging perhaps to do business in a different province in Canada that may be in the U.S. As well, and it just makes it tougher for us to compete globally.
Larry, we saw supply chains come into question over the past 8-9 months. Has that affected you at all?
I don't think the supply chain has really affected us at all. I think the availability of products is out there for us to get our hands on if we had the ability to trade. I think our challenge is more having the ability to have our relationships with our suppliers on a regular basis. We've left a lot of suppliers hanging and leaving them unsure as to how their bills are going to be settled and how they give us products going forward. So I think the relationships has created tension between us and the suppliers due to the circumstances.
How does this affect ultimately the jobs picture? Maybe Peter, let's start with you. Your take on this.
Well, from the agricultural side of the equation, from the malting barley value chain. So, I look at it from right from the breeders and farmers through grain companies, seed companies, all the way to malting and brewing companies. Clearly, it's the end of the value chain. It's the workers in the service industry, food service industry, and beverage industries. It's these sectors that are the most heavily impacted, I think, from the current situation. And when we work our way back through the value chain to the production level, we haven't seen the same kind of impact, fortunately, in agriculture in terms of, as I say, at the production level. So I think that's positive. We continue to have strong export markets. That's positive. But it's the domestic industry that needs to recover. The North American industry, I would say, it's going to take a while for that industry to recover. And certainly, we personally, I feel very bad for the food service industry. I look around here in Winnipeg, where I live, with everything, most restaurants and all restaurants and bars closed for indoor service, relegated only to takeout. and we're seeing a lot of closures and a lot of struggles and a lot of people out of work. So that's obviously where we're seeing really devastating impact in this country.
Michael, tell us about that impact from your perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, 25% of my business is in bars and restaurants, and so clearly we're feeling that impact. I will tell you, back on the supply chain, we definitely get impacted as business has moved out of bars and restaurants. People do continue to drink, and so they're drinking at home, which has put incredible pressure on certain elements of the supply chain. Aluminum cans is certainly under significant pressure. There's a reason that when you go to a grocery store and look down the grocery soft drink aisle, there's a number of outages of products, and that's simply because everybody is being squeezed. Retail's up about 35–40%. So all of us are having issues in getting that supply to meet the retail demand. At the same time, we're working on the other side with bars and restaurants to try and find ways to get more people employed on that side. Fortunately from us, from a business perspective, we've kind of said the bad news is we don't qualify for any government funding. That's also the good news because we've been able to stay very stable from an employment point of view.
Larry, you painted a pretty dismal picture right off the bat. How worried are you going forward with respect to the impact on jobs?
Larissa, we are very concerned about the announcement coming out this afternoon from Chrystia Freeland as to what this support package by sector is going to look like. We have asked for the longest time to have a task force in front of the government to explain our circumstances. The reality is that the help that has been offered to the industry has really not been offered to a lot of the independents across the board. If you look at the help that the government's put out for our industry, they're helping some of the landlords with the rent. We help with some of the payroll, but there are massive expenses in running our businesses, insurance, dishwashers, a million other items that are not being covered. And forget about the fact that you have put people out of work and not allowing them to earn an income. So forget about the help that you're giving, which isn't enough. You've told people you are not allowed to earn an income. And it's very easy for people to sit in government and everywhere else, for that matter, who are earning their regular salaries or even have taken a small amount off, to telling somebody, close your business. And by the way, there's no income for you to take home to pay your personal mortgage, to pay your car payments, to pay anything else. So it is devastating for our industry that we are in need of getting the right support, and we need it soon, because the recovery isn't going to be there in May or June or July, when the vaccine eventually comes out. Most of these businesses are going to be closed. There just isn't a way to sustain them.
Mark, earlier on in the conversation, Larry had mentioned the trickle effect, the businesses on the periphery that get affected because of maybe one sector being shut down. What is that effect, as you see it from a logistical standpoint, from your perspective when it comes to Corby Spirit and Wine?
Well, certainly, I mean, you look at it as a whole, and when one part of it is shut down, especially as quickly and drastically as it was right now, it's certainly going to have an effect, and it certainly would have an effect on demand, which could trickle up all the way to all the direct and indirect jobs that have a hand in that, starting with farming businesses, transportation, packaging, manufacturing, and as we're seeing, obviously, the service businesses, the front lines. Certainly there's been some things that the government has done and across the provinces, but then there's, I think we should take a look at this also and see what context and what environment that we're already operating in. And what I'm referring to is I think the excise tax, which is something I think that we haven't mentioned yet here today, but I think it's something that we can't overlook, in that how negatively that right off the top would affect all the businesses and challenges us all. And although Justin Trudeau recently said that taxes wouldn't be increased as a result of this pandemic, our entire industry faced that in April, and without any change, we're going to keep facing that every April. And that's a production tax. That is something that then its effect is then multiplied as all the other taxes and markups are based upon it. And it harms all businesses and employees involved in our industry. It may be surprising for some to know that spirits businesses like Corby only net about 20% of the retail price of a bottle. And from that amount, we have to pay all of our costs, including marketing for the product, the cost of goods just to produce it, and all our employee wages. That doesn't leave a lot to reinvest behind the business, behind the operations, into our employees, into our products. That's less money to innovate, less money to develop a healthy export business, which we need given the high tax environment here. So this hidden tax would make all of us, Corby, Harm Walker, all other businesses in the beverage alcohol industry, less competitive.
I often talk to a lot of economists and analysts that say there is opportunity here, and there is opportunity for business transformation, that perhaps we can morph into something else. And as we have heard from Peter, from Mark, from Michael, and morphing these distilleries into PPE, and Larry, perhaps pivoting to takeout only, something that perhaps you never thought would be a bigger part of your business. I'm just wondering, from the panel, when you think about what the other side looks like, is there something that you are seeing that perhaps we don't see, that there will be some initiatives, new trends, if you will? Peter, does anything come to mind for you?
I mean, I can only speak to what I see on the sort of almost from a personal standpoint when I look at the brewing industry. I mean, Michael will be better placed to speak on it, but I look at here in Manitoba, how the brewing industry has adapted to the new environment by doing curbside pickup, offering delivery. I've had beer delivered to my house for the first time in my life several times over the last 8 or 9 months. So I think the industry is adapting, and that will pay, or in the long run, they can use those sort of new marketing channels. They can continue to offer delivery services for maybe people that don't have a car or have difficulty accessing the product. So there's probably some positives that will come out of this. So I'll be interested to hear what the others have to say.
Michael.
I do think there's opportunity. There is, although as Larry points out, we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel yet. I think as we come out of this pandemic, and hopefully a vaccine in 2021 will bring people back to some old behaviors. And we've jokingly said here that after this lockdown and everybody spending so much time in their homes, even the introverts are going to want to go out and party. So I hope that brings a renewed level of interest in going out to bars and restaurants and going back out with your friends and spending time. So I think that will come. It's certainly changed behaviors. It's changed it in our industry, where people used to buy, a 6-pack or a 12-pack of beer. They're not going to that retail store as often, so they're buying a 36-pack and a 48-pack. Unfortunately, that means tighter margins for our business. I'd imagine Mark has kind of similar experiences on the spirit side, and larger formats probably selling more. But I think if we can hang in there, and it is a difficult road to continue to hang in there, particularly in the hospitality area. Hopefully, we will see a little bit of a lift as we have vaccines come out and people are willing to go back to their old behaviors.
Mark, I think Michael just handed you the baton. Take it away. Thanks, Michael. I think, we've seen similar trends, larger sizes and familiar brands being bought. The rise of hometainment, I guess, and e-commerce and direct-to-consumer, probably mostly out of necessity. But one of our core values is conviviality, and we believe in face-to-face interactions and people getting together and connections. So we really hope that at the end of this tunnel, whenever it ever happens for us, that people will get back to something like that. What it looks like, who knows, but hopefully they will. And I think we've seen some positive changes to support that. Allowing, for instance, extended patios and different ways to address that. I think what I'd like to see is the regulators perhaps focus in a bit more on whether or not the on-premise, the bars and the restaurants, offers a better way to actually regulate the in-person connections we're seeing nowadays. I think anecdotally we may all know or hear of people getting together still, despite what the government has recommended or required. And one has to think that doing it in an unregulated way it cannot be better than the safety measures that are in the on-premise. So we hope to see that along with a continued evolution of some of the liquor licensing laws, which these are decades and decades old, and so the willingness by some of the regulators to actually touch those and change those as a result of this is encouraging as well.
Larry, I think this means that you have this final word.
Yeah, I think Mark just hit exactly right now. If you look what happened just yesterday on the news, 60 people rented an Airbnb and had a party and were flagged. I think the reality is that no matter how successful the dating apps are on online and Tinder and everything else, I think people need and want to get out of their homes. I like to call it the medicine of the mind. I think people love going out and socializing and complaining about their work and their spouses and their children, and they need that space to go to. I think that is going to definitely come back one day. But Mark hits upon the exact right point. I think the liquor laws in this country are so archaic and I think over conservative. I think if you go to Europe and you look at all the piazzas where everybody sits around and having a glass of wine and walking around, and the extended patios, I see no reason why that would be the way for people to re-engage in society again. I don't think takeout is the solution. You look at all the apps, how they cost 20 to 30% in order to do takeout. The packaging is no good for society in any event. I think you need people to get out again, be back in the spaces where you connect and have human connection. I think that is going to be critical to society going forward. I think if you look what's going to come out of the pandemic right now, the mental health issues and the social anxiety of the younger generation of not mingling with other people, it is not a solution to become a couch potato. That is not going to be the answer to the future of society.
Thank you for all of your thoughts. I do want to open it up to questions because there are some great questions that I'm seeing in Slido. And of course, one of them, before we get to some of the other ones, one of the ones that's of course top of mind for everyone is today's fall fiscal update. So I do want to ask the panel, what do you hope to see? Peter.
Well, I think probably like all the others panelists, we have excessive tax rates on alcohol in Canada. I remember a couple of years back, we were holding a course here in Winnipeg, and we had a couple of fellows that came from Montana, I think, on our course, and they went out the first night they got here to get a case of beer, and they were absolutely blown away by how much it cost them it was over $50 or something for a 2-4 beer. So obviously we hope today that we'll see tax relief from the federal government.
Mark?
Yeah, I mean, for both industry and consumers, I'd really like to see that the hardship imposed by the excise tax escalator is recognized, and that there's a recommendation to consider repealing it. I can't say enough just how hard that is for everybody that is involved in it, everybody in the industry. As mentioned, for us, less money to reinvest and innovate and develop an export business, but for hospitality businesses that survive this pandemic, they'll be even more financially challenged, and they'll have to adapt to new consumer behaviors, but also manage higher costs and increase pricing while they're struggling to stay open. And Canadian consumers who already pay 80% of the price of a drink to the government are going to have to pay even higher prices. So I'd really like to see that first and foremost. I'd like them to see, specifically for hospitality, I'd like to see them continue extending some of the flexibility and measures they've been introducing, like the wage subsidies or rent relief, as well as maybe a holiday on payroll taxes. I think all of those could be helpful.
Michael, what does the government have to do?
You know what? I'd say both Peter and Mark have hit it on the head. This is an opportunity to reduce taxes, to create a stimulus in our economy. It's not the time to be increasing. We've really got to look at how we're going to support this industry and others. But the taxes in this country around alcohol, beer, wine, and spirits are truly unbelievable when you look around the globe. In my previous job, I worked with Bacardi globally, and while Canada is among the top 10 countries in the world for sales of alcohol, it ranks from the tax side really number one around the world for how much the consumers get taxed here. So it's time to make a change. It's time to get rid of the escalator tax, and really I would suggest reducing it to really give that stimulus for this sector.
Larry, you're really boots on the ground. What would you like to see?
Larissa, I agree with all the other three comments that we need to see the taxes reduced on liquor, beer, and wine. But at the same time, we are hoping to see a sector-specific relief package that is going to save the restaurant industry so that we can get back on our feet once the vaccine's in place. And if the government's looking for money of how to fund all of this, go online. Everybody's online buying. Go collect some money from online.
Let me take a look at some of the other questions that are here. I'm curious to see if we can bring something else into the conversation. There was one here on what specific non-monetary support, strategic planning, goal setting, what would have some of the biggest impact on your business? So non-monetary support, that's what we're talking about. Maybe Larry, let's start with you. You're nodding your head.
Narrative. I think the biggest thing for us coming across all media channels through the doctors is that the narrative is that our industry is the cause of COVID or certainly spreads the virus immensely. I think the narrative is wrong, and that needs to change from our side.
Peter, your thoughts?
I can't really comment on that, Larissa. It's not germane to my industry, but I certainly support Larry's comments. I think, the government has to recognize the importance of the food service industry and the alcohol and beverage industry in Canada and provide the supports needed. And certainly being clear in terms of policies and regulations is going to be really important for the sector.
Michael, when it comes to non-monetary support, your thoughts?
I'll look back at something that our premier here in Saskatchewan has done, which is not close down bars and restaurants. And it goes back to a comment made earlier about just natural human behavior. People still want to get together, and using that bar and restaurant industry to say you have to do it safely, do it in places that we can make sure are following the rules, and that is where bars and restaurants are perfectly apt to do that and do it in a safe way. So I think that is something that has to continue to happen. Closing everybody down completely, it's crippling to everybody. You have to let people have a way to earn a living, as Larry pointed out earlier.
There's another question that's come up here with respect to just straight up, plain and simple, is Canada competitive? Maybe we can get into the taxes and regulations, the cost of doing business. But Mark, perhaps you can tackle that from your perspective.
Canada is not the largest country or market in a global context, but we have such a rich history, as mentioned, going back over 200 years, and specifically Canadian whiskey is such an innovative or creative style of whiskey that allows for so many different ways for it to be painted, if you want to use that analogy. As our master distiller, Dr. Don Livermore, says, these are products that are world class, and I'd really like to see how the government could get behind all of that and help support that. The negative policies that we have, dealing province to province, just makes it very difficult. And again, the excise tax situation is something that's just going to keep making it worse. So really like to see the government support our industry, given the importance of it. Given how much the hundreds of millions of dollars that go into export, the fact that Canadian whiskey is one of the highest value add products we have, and really just see the government embrace that rather than like it's done in some other countries, rather than some of the policies we have.
Peter, could you weigh in?
I'm sorry, Larissa.
Oh, forgive me. So we're talking about Canada's competitiveness.
Well, with respect to the agriculture sector that I work in, we are competitive in terms of our production of grains and oilseeds and processed products. I can't speak specifically to the competitiveness of the beer industry in terms of export markets. I think it's probably pretty challenging for Canadian companies to be competitive elsewhere. We do import a lot of beer into Canada from other markets. But again, on the agriculture side, Canada is well positioned to compete in the global markets currently.
Michael, could you kindly weigh in with respect to that question from one of the viewers with respect to Canada's competitiveness? Is Canada competitive?
I would say in the brewing industry we are. We're also uniquely in the brewing side. 85% of the beer consumed here is made here. We're fortunate to have some of the best grain in the entire world that goes into our beers and competitors across Canada. But we use a local product to turn it into what I would say an even better product, which is beer. So I think we are competitive in that front. It's when we get to the next level on how we tax it that we really aren't. And that's where we could make a significant difference that I think will help Canada get through the pandemic even faster.
Another question here from one of the viewers. What can the chambers do to help advocate locally and get our hospitality members engaged in being heard? Larry, would you like to tackle that one?
Sure. I think we are part of a committee right now with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, representing about 30 to 40,000 of the restaurants and bars and cafes across the country. I believe the chambers have to stay on the government and making sure that they understand what the profit and loss looks like of our industry, and make sure, and remember that our industry is the starter for most employees before they go to university. This is how people pay for universities, to come through our industry to start. So I think people don't understand the value proposition of our industry. A lot of people say to me, what do you do for a job? I said, I'm in the hospitality industry. Oh, so you couldn't find a job anywhere else? I think we aren't seen as a very credible industry. People go to the restaurant industry when they can't find another job. I think it's critical for people to understand that we help the economy in massive ways to get people out into the workforce. And I think the chambers need to get that message across to government sooner than later.
Thank you. Mark, your thoughts?
I think things like what we're doing today, and things like the campaign against excise, I think these are things that the Chamber is doing very well to educate and make the government aware that they can't make these decisions in a vacuum. They can't make these decisions without consultation. They need to understand the impact of their decisions, and what they'll do to the industry, both direct and indirect. To keep us competitive globally, to allow us to continue to help each other to create these jobs, all the way through the chain.
Peter, I see you nodding your head.
No, I'm just agreeing. I think both Larry and Mark really hit the nail on the head.
Michael, care to weigh in?
I think all the chambers need to stay united on message, and I think everybody across the country needs to continue to push to make the right decision, which is the difficult decision, to, instead of increasing taxes, is to reduce taxes to create that stimulus. Larry points out there's a lot of jobs that are related to this industry, and so giving it an opportunity to rebound quicker is going to help the entire Canadian economy.
I've heard all of our guests today talk about the excessive tax on alcohol, the excise tax. There's a question here from someone from the audience that suggests the alcohol excise tax is a federal tax. What can other levels of government, municipalities, provinces, territories, do to help? Mark.
Well, I think mentioned earlier, about 80% of the retail price of our product is tax or markup. So the federal and the provincial governments can all take a look at just how much or how excessive those rates are for our product, both for us and for consumers. I mean, Corby alone on excise, I think since its introduction has cost us over $12 million, and that number just keeps on growing. We've done our best to try and absorb that to the extent we can, but I mean, there comes a point where we have to pass that along to consumers. So consumers are just going to keep paying more for their favorite drink in the outlets once they reopen and at shelf. So the federal government, the provincial governments, all of them can look at their tax policies and just ensure that they allow companies that are participating in this industry to stay competitive.
Larry.
Larissa, I don't know if you know this, but if you drive over the border to Buffalo, When I buy a bottle of vodka in Niagara Falls, it'll cost me $36 to buy that vodka. And my esteemed partners here will tell you that this is not untrue. If I drive over 5 minutes over the border to Buffalo, I'll pay $11 for that very same bottle of vodka. Therefore, when you come to our bars and restaurants, in order for us to make, and right now the restaurant industry only makes about 5% bottom line total on all your sales. So if you think that all these taxes come along, all of these gents here increase their prices to us, we've got to charge you $6 for a little 1 ounce glass of vodka when you can pop over to Buffalo and they're doing shooters all night long for 58 cents for a shooter. We are not competitive globally. It needs to change. We need to relax, stop being so conservative, and open up our minds to making our industry better.
Michael, how can all levels of government get on board?
I'm just going to echo what Larry and Mark have both said. It's time to reflect and look at how you're going to create stimulus in your economy, and it is time to actually reduce taxes to create that lift. Everybody, the margins keep getting tighter. All suppliers, all producers, all in our industry try and absorb what we can out of taxes. But the fact that the taxes keep escalating, even without actually a government discussion on it, they just automatically are escalating, which is ludicrous to me. It has to change.
Peter, the final thought to you.
Well, I support what the others have said, and again, as I said earlier, I think that each of the provinces needs to think very carefully about the food service industry. As Larry said, most of us have all worked in a restaurant at some point in our lives. I certainly did for many years to support my education. It's such an important part of our economy. All of us are just, I think, champing at the bit to get out and socialize, and restaurants and bars are such an integral part of the Canadian fabric. So provinces and the federal government need to think very carefully how to support the industry. Taxes are obviously extraordinarily high in this country on alcohol, and I hope that that's taken into consideration in later today by the government's release.
Peter, thank you kindly for that final thought. Thank you, of course, to all of you for joining us. Thank you to our guests, Larry, Michael, Mark, and Peter. We will see what comes out of that fall fiscal update later today. Thank you to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, all the tech crews that helped to put this thing together, and of course, if you're interested in more information, please go to the Chamber's alcohol tax campaign at freezethealcoholtax.ca. Thank you to all of you. Please support Canada's restaurants, bars, alcohol, and the hospitality industry. Thank you again. Stay safe. Thank you kindly.